Today on CityCast Chicago, the spring legislative season is officially over. So what did lawmakers get done over the weekend? Plus, brace yourself for more wildfire smoke. And have you spotted Chonkosaurus on the Chicago River yet? It's Tuesday, June 3rd. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. Morning, everybody. I am in the booth today with executive producer Simone Alisea. Morning, Simone. How was your weekend?
Good morning, Jacoby. It was good. I feel like Summertime Shy has really started because I've got like parties every weekend in June. And so I'm trying to pace myself, I think.
Now, you was really active. We all met up for like a quick happy hour on Friday night, and you was already dressed in your party clothes. And I think it was a themed party. It was like an early 2000s party.
It was a 2009
Oh, it's very specific
party. It's very specific. Yes. Come dressed as you would in 2009.
Come dressed as you are still reeling with the collapse of the housing market in the broader global
You trade
economy.
One recession for another. I mean, what's the difference, really?
100%. Hey, I spent a lot of time outdoors this weekend, mostly performing. So shout out to everybody who came through for Karaoke Storytellers. Shout out to Ryan, Trejay, Natalie, Al, Seema, Rory, our audience volunteer. It was a really good night. And then I got to sit down with Ayanna to talk about the history of gospel music at First Presbyterian Church in Woodlawn. And so very active weekend. I'm rolling right into a softball game tonight. And so no time to rest, but we do have some time to catch up on some stories from over the weekend. And the big one was the rush or sprint towards the end down in Springfield. Simone, we talked about this a little bit last week, how there was still so much on the agenda in Springfield, right? Need to address passing a state budget. What are they going to do about public transit? Are they going to add more funding for higher education to schools across the state? How are we going to insulate ourselves from potential funding cuts from the Trump administration, the federal government? Like, it was a lot on their plate, and they've been there since January. And yet, a lot of that stuff still wasn't done heading into Friday and Saturday. And so, Simone, let's talk about the big thing. Did they get a state budget passed?
Yes, there is a state budget. It passed late in the hours Saturday or early Sunday. They basically have a midnight deadline on Saturday to end the session. And that's actually significant because it does set some things into effect. If, for example, they hadn't passed anything, like maybe a certain transit funding bill that we're going to talk about, it means that if they want to take that up after that deadline, the voting requirements become more stringent, that anything they pass after June 1 would require a 3/5 majority instead of a simple majority. And so it really mattered. That deadline actually did matter on some level. And so the larger state budget went through a mix of cuts and taxes. Obviously, we knew going into this session that we were seeing a really big budget gap. And of course, as you know, Democrats are constantly talking about uncertainty at the federal level in terms of more cuts coming and any other changes that could be coming. And so we've got some new taxes. Tax on sports betting, new taxes on tobacco products. That includes vapes and nicotine pouches as well. More taxes on businesses that don't have a physical presence in Illinois, that sell a lot in Illinois, sales taxes for those businesses. So think like Amazon, that kind of thing.
Kind of a way to get those taxes to online retailers as well.
Yeah. And then some changes to try to essentially recoup more taxes from businesses, particularly businesses who are moving money outside of the state or outside of the country even, and also extending the hotel operators tax to operators of Airbnbs and Verbos. So that's where new revenue is coming from to plug the gap. But of course, we have some cuts too. The big one that we kind of knew was coming, Pritzker said this in his original budget address back in February, was cutting a program, for a healthcare program for immigrants covering ages 42 to 64. The program serving seniors, immigrant seniors, will still be in place for now, although
some representatives are very concerned this will be the last year for sure.
Absolutely. And a lot of that also has to do with potential cuts to Medicaid that could be coming, because that program is sort of jointly run between the state and Medicaid. They're related in a very close way. And so if there are cuts to Medicaid at the federal level, that would, in addition to all the other impacts that cuts to Medicaid would have, that would be another thing that would be impacted.
Even as people knew this was coming, a lot of progressive legislators either voted against the budget or were really holding out up until the last minute or if they were going to vote, because even as this program they say could save the state some $330 million, to be the governor who outwardly spoke out against the Trump administration's sort of cruel immigration policies that we've seen over these last few months, one who really had a lot of spats with Mayor Johnson on how to properly deal with and sort of spread out responsibility for how we provide resources for migrants. To see this program being cut, a lot of Pritzker's more progressive allies feel like it is, in some ways taking a step back from trying to be a safe haven and providing resources. And so a lot of people feel that it doesn't stand in line. And in addition to that cut, feel like some of these other cuts that the governor has really prided himself on, like he has helped take Illinois' sort of rainy day fund from less than $60,000 to over $2 billion in his time as governor. But he's saying this time around, we won't be adding additional money there. And so you see not only some of these bigger cuts, but you see a lot of potentially temporary pauses in some of these bigger programs the governor has held his hat on for some time.
And there's a lot of sort of working around the margins here. So, for example, some Republican lawmakers took issue with there's going to be a pay increase for direct service providers, the state's direct service providers. However, there's also probably going to be a cut in hours. You had Republican lawmakers coming out being like, well, what is... like functionally, you've done the same thing, right? It still doesn't mean more money in people's pockets, right? In state employees' pockets.
Some of those same lawmakers push back against the raise they also are likely to see due to this budget. But at the same time, they didn't reject it. They were just like, oh, we do. Why are you giving us more money?
Yes, part of the budget included a raise in base pay for lawmakers in Springfield.
So we talked about a few of the cuts, a few of the taxes. Let's be real, y'all. This was a 1,000-page document dropped Saturday. Us, colleagues, people around the state are still sparsing through it. But there were a few things that were not in it, right? They were a little more glaring and some things that didn't pass. Simone, what's the big one?
Transit. Transit reform, no transit funding. So you talked about this on Friday with Nick Blumberg of WTTW. It's funny because when we first covered Pritzker's budget address, one of the things that we noted in our coverage was, he didn't talk about transit at all. That's despite the fact that transit agencies, regional transit agencies around Chicago have been sounding the alarm, basically saying that, they're facing this sort of doomsday fiscal cliff, over $700 million, a $700 million gap come 2026. That's going to result in like 40% cuts. It was talking about like 1 in 5 Chicago commuters potentially stranded out here.
Again, I know that CTA, RTA, PACE, Metra, in addition to facing this very real budget gap, also it is in their their best interest to really catastrophize this and let us know what could be lost.
They're doing some excellent marketing out here.
100%. I was terrified.
Yeah, they really are. And so, but lawmakers in Springfield largely over the past several months have basically been like, look, there's not going to be any funding without reform. There's really no appetite for truly kind of bringing in new revenue, particularly because it was such a tough budget year to begin with. But also, generally, lawmakers feel that the issue is not so much the lack of funding. The issue is governance and the way the Regional Transportation Authority, which oversees CTA, Metro, PACE, they sort of feel like that agency is disempowered in some ways. Isn't it really able to kind of actually oversee those agencies with any power? And so there have been sort of several iterations of this. The latest came late last week. We got similar plans from the House and Senate to create a different agency, the Northern Illinois Transit Authority. The sort of governing change there would be, as you guys talked about on Friday, that that authority, that agency would sort of be responsible for, creating a universal fare system, overseeing capital projects, and things like that. And then
universal schedule.
Exactly. These transit agencies would basically be in charge of making sure the trains run on time, making sure the buses run on time, making sure they're clean, which they are theoretically already responsible for, but it would sort of take some of that other stuff out of their bucket. So we got that proposal first, and then we started to see the funding proposals. And the funding proposals relied on a variety of taxes. I think a big one was this tax on deliveries of package deliveries. That was a really big one. It would have excluded all grocery deliveries or medication deliveries. But as somebody who is a frequent Uber Eats user, certainly would have felt that one if that had
100%.
passed.
I already feel the rideshare one.
There were other elements of the funding package, toll wage surcharges, redirecting some suburban sales tax revenue, which a lot of the suburban representatives really did not like, real estate transfer tax, which again, a lot of suburban lawmakers did not like. And so, yeah, there's a lot of, it's interesting because there are a lot of suburban lawmakers who feel like this is a bailout for Chicago. CTA certainly would be the largest beneficiary of new funding, and they also account for the most rides in any transit package. Although one thing that's interesting is like the governance of this new regional agency is, I actually don't think is as Chicago stacked as maybe some people might assume.
Right. That was my thought as well. I was like 5 seats to the governor, 5 seats to Cook County, 5 seats to the mayor. And then I understand the frustration with just 1 seat per Collar County. But the idea that these 15 seats are automatically slanted towards Chicago, given the various relationships governors and mayors have had over the years, given the fact that like Cook County tries to run independently. In fact, when Chicago and Illinois try to take pot shots at each other, Cook County is like, actually, we're doing better than both of you. Actually, we don't have to raise property taxes like maybe y'all have to, or levy our property tax increase the same way. A lot more political maneuvering between the county, city, and state in a way that I don't think is as this is all for Chicago. And particularly, they say the mayor of Chicago.
It's interesting because, like, again, most of the transit rides are happening in Chicago or they're coming to Chicago. That is sort of the truth of the situation. So in many ways, it would make sense for Chicago to have quite a lot of say over what is happening with public transit in Chicago and the Chicagoland area. And I think there's probably a lot of suburban voters who don't care for that. Also, this regional authority would theoretically be responsible for improving transit in the suburbs, potentially bringing more. But again, given the fact that we're having a conversation just about maintaining what we have, that is certainly a long way off. But suffice it to say, none of that passed. None of that was part of any package over the weekend that lawmakers were voting on. And so everything's a little up in the air right now. Again, they could call a special session. I think there's a lot of appetite to get this solved, right? I don't think anybody wants, funding to go away for public transit. And again, there's a lot of consensus on the governance aspect of it. It's just this funding aspect that is very, very tricky. It did pass the Senate. So the trick is this bill that included both the funding part and the governance part that did pass the Senate, but it just didn't have the support in the House. Some other things that didn't come up that are maybe a little bit less surprising. The state is not funding a new Bears stadium. I don't think anyone is.
No, they told those moms we do not have an appetite for it. And I will say, I thought they would crack a lot sooner than now.
The Bears would crack a lot sooner, you mean?
No, legislators. I actually thought lawmakers would crack a lot sooner. I didn't necessarily think the Chicago over Arlington play was going to have nearly as much pressure as they thought. But I thought for either Chicago or Arlington Heights, they would have already at least put together a lackluster funding plan. They basically told them, no, like we're not.
No, they were like, we're not even talking about it. We have other things to talk about. There was also no pension reform passed, which you got to go back and listen to our episode about pensions because that will pretty much explain everything you need to know.
Now we must wait and see if and when lawmakers will call a session and if they're able to get these transit bills through. On Saturday, I finally got out to Northerly Island for my birding class. Shout out to the Chicago Ornithological Society. When I first got out there, I was very happy. The sun was out. It was shining. It felt good. It was a little breezy. Wasn't a cloud in the sky. And yet, like, there was still this like foggy, like hazy color in the sky. The air quality was only going to maybe be like a little bad or noticeable over the weekend, but it seems like it is continuing into the top of the week. So Simone, can you give us a little CityCast Chicago climate corner on what's going on with the haze we're seeing outside?
Yeah, so this is coming from a really large wildfire that is burning through Manitoba in Canada. They are facing some really, really bad fires and, of course, some really bad smoke that has been blowing into the Midwest, into the plains, and into the Chicago area. The worst of it, according to EPA sensors, was on Friday and into Saturday morning. Air quality was, moderate to unhealthy for sensitive groups. Specifically, you're talking about, if you really want to get into it, you're talking about particulate matter, right? So that's like stuff is burning. There's stuff in the air that you should not be breathing into your lungs because it's bad. That is probably accounts for a lot of the haze that you were seeing that morning. We are still seeing a little bit of it. On Sunday morning, there was a little bit of it and then it kind of cleared out. And then Monday morning too, there was some, and then it's cleared out. As we're speaking, the National Weather Service is saying that it might still be smoky Monday, right? Like I'm looking outside and like, is it cloudy? Is it hazy? Hard to tell. If you look at the air quality index, it says that Chicago is in the good category. So it doesn't seem like it is so bad, but we're also expecting some storms early this week that could blow stuff out. What is that face?
Oh my God. I'm looking at some of the pictures of the sky in like parts of British Columbia, but also in parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's really awful up there.
Yeah, they said I think it was like an average of 77 fires. They've already eclipsed that already. I think at the time we were recording this, there was one article said that there were, I don't want to get this wrong, but there were like, was it 120 wildfires burning like as we speak? The numbers always get me because it's not a natural disaster that I have a vocabulary for. And so it's the last few years that I've had to see it a lot more, but had to talk about it a lot more. And I know it happens in, parts of the country all the time.
It's really alarming, as far as like our experience here in Chicago, luckily the smoke isn't as bad as it was, say, in 2023, right? Where we had that just like blanket of smoke, I think some of the worst air quality in the world at that point. Another thing that we're going to be seeing here in the Chicago area is today, on Tuesday, temperatures are going to be, nearing 90 degrees. Yeah, it's a very weird climate weather moment happening in Chicago right now. So just take a look. Most people you can usually find the AQI on your phone, on your weather app. Take a look at it. If you have your KN95 or N95 masks, right? Like that will help with particulate matter for sure. Especially if you are particularly sensitive. That includes, folks with asthma.
Is there any chance that we could walk outside or wake up to like what New York and New Jersey did back in 2023 when it was just the apocalyptic orange sky? Like, are we too south for that?
Yeah, in this particular forecast, it doesn't look like it's going to get that bad. I'm certainly no expert. It doesn't seem likely.
Last week in our guide to June, we talked a lot about getting out to enjoy the river walk. We talked about getting out on the river. And just as we had that conversation, one of Chicago's most famed critters, Chonkosaurus, was spotted again on the river. And Simone, I felt like we've mentioned Chonkosaurus, but I feel like I'm learning more this year than I have the last few years. Maybe I just saw the pictures a few years ago and didn't really dive into the details because we had like foxes and plovers, but it feels like a slow year. And so I feel like we've gotten a little more time to talk about Chonky straight up.
Yeah, Chonkosaurus definitely emerged onto the scene at a time where Chicago had many animal friends to love. And so Chonkosaurus, if you missed it a couple years ago, is a very large snapping turtle, extremely
Very big.
large.
Estimates of like 40 to 50 pounds.
Yes, huge. That is a fourth grader sized snapping turtle.
And I'm not gonna lie, the name, I don't know. You look at this turtle, and I typically only see I've seen a lot of little turtles at like Garfield Park Conservatory
out on the little
on the
logs,
river.
yeah.
But like you see this big thing, and you are like, nah, that's a dinosaur, dog. That's a dinosaur.
Yes. In one article, one biologist estimated a female, potentially somewhere between 40 to 50 years old. They live a pretty long time. But Chonkosaurus, she has been spotted again out in the Chicago River 2 years after hitting viral fame. Block Club Chicago interviewed Christina Kurth with the Shed Aquarium, who said that she had been seeing Chonkosaurus out there for the past 6 years or so. So known to people who are like out on the river doing conservation or out. People who are kind of running those circles, but I suppose new to the rest of us who maybe don't spend a lot of time on the river or doing cool stuff. And it's generally believed that Chonk's appearance and being out is a sign of success for a lot of the conservation that has happened around the river. It's so funny. Our newsletter editor, Emmy Mack, recently wrote an article about sort of the history of Chicago's river and how it used to be called the Stinking River because it was so polluted, not just with, of course, the sanitary sewage from before we reversed the river, but also lots of industrial pollution well after that.
Like those two things combined to create a culture of then like littering and just like disregard for the river. And what's really cool about this story is the estimates of like maybe 40 or 50 years old means that Chonkosaurus's life potentially, some say it could have been a pet put into the river and all these other things, but essentially its lifespan could be right alongside the lifespan of the like uptick in conservation efforts. I think that like a huge 1972 bill really kicked off river conservation efforts. So the thought that Chonkosaurus potentially for most of its life has just been benefiting from a year that has been a river that has been getting cleaner and cleaner year over year, which also means they've had to watch as more kayakers and drunk divers
and hot tub boats.
And hot tub boats have popped up in the river over the last few years. But I think back in 2023, I saw so many pictures of it by like isolated.
Yes, without like a relative.
Yeah, but some of these most recent pictures, and again, maybe people have already seen these, but some of the more recent pictures have had like painted turtles, which are the other major species of turtles in the Chicago River alongside snapping turtles. And when you see it alongside these painting turtles, which are at least the ones I am much more likely to spot at the conservatory or on the river, this thing about 4 times the size of the biggest painting turtle. And then like the painting turtles have these really small legs or much smaller legs comparatively. And Chonkosaurus got these mitts with just claws on it that I've since learned can rip apart raccoons and drag ducks down to the bottom of the river.
I'm going to say what everyone's thinking. She thick.
She thick as hell. You funny. You funny. I feel like I'm rubbing off on some There's certain phrases you use that even if you was using it before, I'm like, nah, that's some Chicago shit right there. Nah, she thick, bro. It's nuts. And people have said that she is thick and she is active.
That was my favorite quote. My favorite quote in the Block Club story. Kurth has even spotted Chonk actively breeding and has seen many baby snappers over the last several years. So she's getting it. She's out here.
Helping repopulate the river. Oh my God.
I think that's yet another reason to get out on the river this summer is maybe you'll have a chance to see one of Chicago's friendly animal sidekicks, Miss Chonkosaurus.
But it goes without saying Be respectful.
Yes. Keep your distance.
Just because, you know, the large narrative is they just slow and stuff, you still in the water. And they are very defensive. They snapping. It's in the name. I am planning to go kayaking in the next couple of weeks. I do like kayaking on the North Branch, where you're most likely to spot Chonkosaurus. And so I'm hoping this is the year that I finally get that picture. I've got plenty of turtle pictures, but I don't have a chonky picture. So this is the year, Jay. This is the year. Please join me in giving a huge thanks to our executive producer, Simone Alicea. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Hey, thanks, Jacoby.
Before we get out of here, please bookmark our website, chicago.citycast.fm. There you can subscribe to our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago, where every single morning, Monday through Friday, we will send you some of the articles you need to read, some events you should put in your calendar, and a whole bunch of other stuff in between. Neighborhood and walking guides, our favorite food and drink that we want to put you on, and so much more. It is free. Let me remind you, it is free. All you got to do, visit the website and subscribe. Even though it's 2 weeks away, I could not keep my excitement in for probably the best Chicago hip hop lineup that is happening in the city, not just this month, but potentially all summer, y'all. And I'm talking local Chicago artists at Navy Pier. In 2 weeks on June 20th, they're going to have Mick Jenkins, Jay Bambi, Femdop, Manessi, Michael, Rico Shy, Renzel, Daylight Tone, bro, and others. Like an entire free lineup, 4-hour festival, nothing but Chicago, fire, flame. I'm going to be out there. Hopefully you'll join me. I will drop a link in our show notes. As always, we appreciate you for listening, for reading, making time for the podcast whenever you do. If you can't tell from listening to this episode, we really enjoy making it. So we're going to be back bright and early tomorrow. Hopefully you'll join us. Peace.